Nathan Brooks moved before he was even awake. The zipper hissed. A body slid into the dark, and his hand shot out and clamped around a stranger's wrist like a steel trap. 8 years out of the army, and his reflexes still hadn't forgotten a thing. "Don't move," he growled. Then a voice, soft, shaking, terrified, whispered back, "Stay calm. No one will see us." He froze, because the woman kneeling in his tent at midnight wasn't a thief. She was Victoria Hale, the billionaire CEO, who signed every paycheck in that company. And she hadn't come for what everyone would assume. She'd come because he was the only man alive she could trust. Before we go on, drop the name of your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels tonight. And if stories about honor second chances and standing tall when the world tries to break you mean something to you, subscribe and stay with me to the very end. You won't want to miss what happens. The mountain wind came down off the ridge that night like it had somewhere to be. It shoved against the canvas walls of the little tent, made the poles creak, and slipped through the seams to touch the back of Nathan Brooks's neck. He lay on a thin cot with one arm behind his head, and his boots still on the way a man sleeps when he's spent too many years in places where you don't take your boots off. 60 yards up the slope, the luxury cabins glowed gold behind their glass. Generators hummed. Somewhere, a hot tub bubbled. The executives of Hale Dynamics slept under goose-down comforters and heated floors. Nathan slept in a surplus tent with a headlamp, a thermos, and a photograph of his son taped to the tent pole where he could see it. He wasn't bitter about it. A man could waste his whole life being bitter about where he slept. Nathan had learned that the hard way in a hospital in Germany, in a divorce lawyer's office, in the long gray mornings when Noah was still small enough to cry for a mother who wasn't coming back. Bitterness was a luxury, and Nathan Brooks couldn't afford luxuries. What he could afford was work. And there was plenty of it at a corporate retreat like this, 300 people. 40 cabins, a mess hall, and a plumbing system somebody had installed on the cheap 15 years ago. So they'd brought him up the mountain with the maintenance crew, given him a radio, and told him to keep the lights on and the water running while the important people did their trust falls and their PowerPoints. He'd worked 14 hours that day. His hands were cracked. His back ached in the old familiar place. And he was almost asleep when the zipper on his tent began to move. It moved slow. Careful. The way a person moves when they don't want to be heard. That was what woke the soldier in him. Not the sound, the intention behind it. His hand shot out and caught the wrist before his mind had finished deciding to do it. He heard a sharp intake of breath, a small cry choked off in a throat, and the whole tent went rigid with the two of them frozen in the dark. "Don't move," Nathan said, low and flat. "Who are you? Stay calm." The whisper was ragged. "Please, no one can see us. Please let go of my arm, you're hurting me." He knew the voice. Everybody in that company knew that voice. He'd heard it from a stage that afternoon, thanking the employees for their loyalty. He let go like the wrist had turned hot. "Ms. Hale." He fumbled for the headlamp and clicked it on, and there she was, blinking in the sudden white light. Victoria Hale, 30 years old, worth more money than Nathan would see in 10,000 lifetimes, kneeling on the dirt floor of a maintenance man's tent at midnight. Except she didn't look like the woman from the stage. That woman had worn a tailored blazer and a smile like a locked door. This woman was wrapped in a coat thrown over pajamas, her hair loose and wild from the wind, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, her whole body trembling so hard he could hear her teeth. Nathan sat up fast. "Ma'am, you can't be in here." His voice dropped to a hiss. "Do you understand what this looks like? Do you have any idea what people would say? I know exactly what it looks like." She wrapped her arms around herself. "That's why I didn't turn on a flashlight. That's why I waited until the cabins went dark. I'm not stupid, Mr. Brooks." "I didn't say you were." He rubbed a hand down his face. "But if one person sees the CEO crawling out of my tent at midnight, they're not going to write a story about two people talking. And it's not your career that ends. It's mine. And I've got a boy at home who needs his father to keep his job." That reached her. He watched it land, watched the shame flicker across her face, and for a second he thought she'd get up and leave. Instead, she made a small broken sound and pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. "Then throw me out," she whispered. "Go ahead. You'd be right to. Everyone's right to. I don't have anywhere else to go, and there's not a single person on this whole mountain I can talk to, and I picked you because you're the only one who's ever looked at me like I was a person instead of a signature. So throw me out, Mr. Brooks. I'm used to it." Nathan Brooks had put a lot of things out into the cold in his life. He'd buried friends. He'd signed papers ending his marriage. He'd watched a moving truck carry away half of everything he owned. But he had never in his life been able to put a crying person out into the dark, and he wasn't going to start with one who'd run to him because she thought he was decent. He blew out a long breath. "Sit down," he said. "On the cot. Floor's freezing." He grabbed the wool blanket off the end and pushed it at her. "Wrap up in that before you shake yourself apart. And keep your voice down, for both our sakes." She stared at the blanket like she didn't understand it. Then she took it, and she sat, and she pulled it around her shoulders, and something in her face came undone. The trembling didn't stop, but it changed. It went from fear to grief, which he understood was worse. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet." He sat on the overturned crate that served as his chair and set his forearms on his knees. "You came to a stranger's tent at midnight, crying like the world's ending. That doesn't happen over a bad day at work. So you're going to tell me what happened, and then we're going to figure out how to get you back to your cabin before sunrise without ending 3 careers including mine. Deal?" For a moment, she just looked at him. Then incredibly, a small wet laugh escaped her. "Deal," she said. "You know you're the first person who's given me an order in about 6 years?" "Yeah, well." He almost smiled. "I used to do it professionally." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. "The Army. Combat engineer, 11 years. Built bridges, cleared roads, blew up the ones we didn't want anybody using." He shrugged. "Now I fix toilets for rich people on mountains. Life's a funny thing." "You say that like you're ashamed of it." "I'm not ashamed of a day of it." The answer came out harder than he meant it to. "I've built things with these hands that held 10,000 pounds. I've kept water running in places where running water kept people alive. There's no shame in useful work, Ms. Hale. 90% of the people in those cabins couldn't survive a week doing what I do. So no, I'm not ashamed. But I'm not going to pretend I don't know exactly what I look like to your world either." She was quiet. The wind pushed at the tent. "My father called me an hour ago," she said finally. There it was. Nathan waited. "He calls me every night at 11, has for years. He says it's to discuss the business, but it's not. It's to remind me who I belong to." Her voice was flat now, worn smooth like a stone. "Tonight he told me I'm getting married." Nathan's eyebrows rose. "Congratulations." "I've never met the man." He sat with that a second. "Come again. His name is Preston Aldridge. His family controls one of the largest private equity funds on the East Coast. My father needs their capital to finance the expansion he's promised the board, and the cleanest way to get it, he's decided, is to merge our families." She said it in the dead recitation voice of somebody quoting a document. "So I'm to be introduced as Preston's fiancée at the charity gala in 3 weeks. My father has already given a statement to the press. He didn't ask me, Mr. Brooks. He informed me. The way you'd inform a shipping department that the manifest has changed." Nathan felt the old heat rise up in his chest, the one he thought he'd learned to keep leashed. "You're a grown woman," he said carefully. "You run the company. Tell him no." She laughed, and this time there was nothing wet or small about it. It was bitter and sharp and older than she was. "You don't understand. Nobody ever understands. I am the CEO. It says so on the door. But my father is the chairman of the board, and he built this company from a garage, and every director in that room owes their fortune to him. The title is a costume, Mr. Brooks. If I say no to him, he'll have me voted out by Friday. He's told me so. He said it the way you'd tell a child there's no dessert if she doesn't finish her plate." Her hands were shaking again. "I have run that company for 4 years. I've grown revenue every quarter. And I have exactly as much real power as I did when I was 9 years old. And he locked me in the study for correcting him at dinner. He locked you in a study. I was a bright child. She smiled at nothing. He didn't care for bright in a daughter. He cared for obedient. Nathan looked at this woman the whole world envied, whose picture was on magazine covers, who owned homes on 3 continents, sitting on his cot in a borrowed blanket, and he felt something he had absolutely no business feeling toward a billionaire. He felt sorry for her. "So why me?" he said. "You've got lawyers. You've got 100 people in those cabins who'd cut off their own hand to help you. Why crawl into a maintenance man's tent? Because every one of those 100 people wants something from me." She met his eyes and held them. A promotion. A contract. To be seen standing next to me. To use me. When they smile at me, I can see them calculating. Every single one. Except you. She swallowed. "Do you remember 3 days ago in the parking garage at headquarters?" He frowned. "I remember I was replacing a light ballast. My heel broke. The strap just snapped and I went down and I dropped everything, my phone, my folder papers, everywhere, and I was on the concrete in a $2,000 suit and I felt like an absolute fool. And 30 feet away there were 3 vice presidents who saw the whole thing." Her voice cracked. "And not one of them moved. They just stood there and watched to see what I'd do. But you put down your tools and you walked over and you helped me pick up every piece of paper and you handed me my phone and you said—" She stopped, her chin quivering. "Do you remember what you said?" Nathan did, though he hadn't thought a thing of it at the time. "I said, easy does it. Everybody hits the ground sometimes. The trick is, who helps you up?" "You didn't know who I was?" "Course I knew who you were." He shrugged. "Your face is on the wall in the lobby I mop. But you didn't treat me like it." The tears spilled over now, running freely, and she didn't bother to stop them. "You treated me like a person who fell down. You didn't calculate anything. You just helped me up and went back to your work, and I got in my car. And I cried for 20 minutes in the parking garage, Mr. Brooks, because I could not remember the last time a human being was simply kind to me without wanting a single thing in return." She pressed her lips together. "So tonight, when my father told me my life belongs to him, you were the only face I could picture that didn't want something from me. I'm sorry. It's not fair to you. But you're the only safe person I have, and I don't even know you." The tent was silent except for the wind and her ragged breathing. Nathan got up, poured coffee from the thermos into the metal cup and pressed it into her cold hands, folding her fingers around the warmth. "Drink that," he said gruffly. "It's terrible, but it's hot." She drank. She made a face. He almost smiled again. "Told you. It's awful. Best I've got." He sat back down. "Now listen to me, Ms. Hale." "Victoria." He hesitated. Then, "Victoria, listen. I'm going to tell you something, and I'm going to tell you straight, because that's the only way I know how to talk, and because it sounds like everybody in your life has been lying to you politely for 30 years. He leaned forward. "You are not property. I don't care whose name is on the building. I don't care how much money that man made in his garage. No father has the right to sell his daughter to fix his balance sheet. That's not business. That's not even greed. That's a man who looked at his own child and saw a bargaining chip, and there's a special kind of cold it takes to do that, and it is his coldness, Victoria. Not your fault, not your failure, his." She was crying harder now, but it was a different kind, the kind that comes when someone finally says out loud, the thing you've been afraid was true. "You don't know him," she whispered. "You don't know what he's capable of. I know men like him. I've built bridges for men like him, and I've watched men like him send other people's sons across those bridges into places they'd never go themselves." His jaw tightened. "The one thing men like that can't stand, the only thing, is somebody who won't be bought and won't be scared. It drives them out of their minds because money and fear are the only 2 tools they own. You take those away, they've got nothing. And what happens to the person who won't be bought or scared?" Her eyes were huge and dark. "In my father's world, do you know what happens to them?" Yeah. Nathan's voice was quiet. I've got a pretty good idea what happens to them. He tries to burn their whole life to the ground. He held her gaze. I know because it happened to somebody once. Somebody I loved. She frowned. Who? And Nathan opened his mouth and then closed it. Because some things a man keeps folded up small and doesn't take out for strangers, even strangers who've cried on his cot. Another time, he said. That one's mine. She didn't push. He respected her for that. Instead, she looked around the little tent, at the crate, the thermos, the tools lined up neat against the wall, the way a soldier lines things up, and her eyes stopped on the photograph taped to the pole. A boy, maybe 7, gap-toothed, holding up a lopsided birdhouse and grinning like he'd built the Eiffel Tower. Is that him? She asked. Your son. Every hard edge in Nathan's face went soft at once. That's Noah. He's beautiful. He's a menace. But he said it the way a man says the best word he knows. 8 years old going on 40. Asks 1,000 questions a day and every one of them's a good one. Built that birdhouse himself mostly. I just held the pieces. He reached out and touched the corner of the photo without seeming to know he was doing it. His mother left when he was 3. Decided the single-parent VA disability tight budget life wasn't what she signed up for, and I try not to blame her too much. She's not a cruel woman. She was just tired and I couldn't give her the life she wanted, and one morning she was gone. He drew his hand back. So it's been him and me. 6 years. Just the two of us against the world, and honestly, Victoria, I wouldn't trade it. Not for those cabins. Not for any of it. Victoria watched him with an expression he couldn't read. You love being his father, she said. It's the first thing about you that isn't guarded. The second you said his name, all your armor came off. Being his father is the only thing I've ever done that I know I got right. Nathan's throat worked. I'll tell you what I told him last week. He came home from school upset. Some kid told him his dad's a janitor, said it like it was dirty. And Noah asked me, Dad is fixing things a bad job. Nathan's voice roughened. And I got down on my knee and I said, son, listen to me. Fixing things is my job, but it is not my career. My career is you. My career is raising a good man. Everything else I do so I can afford to have that career. And there is no better career in the world. And you know what he did? What? He hugged me so hard he knocked me over. Nathan laughed quiet and wet. 8 years old, and he knocked a 190-pound man flat on the kitchen floor, and we just lay there laughing. He shook his head. That Victoria, that's rich. Everything else is just paying rent. For a long moment, Victoria Hale, worth $2 billion, said nothing at all. And when she finally spoke, her voice was so small, it nearly disappeared into the wind. Nobody ever said anything like that to me, she said. My whole life. Nobody ever told me I was somebody's career. Nobody ever knelt down and told me I mattered more than the money. She wiped her face. I would have God, Mr. Brooks. I would have given every dollar I have to be that little boy on that kitchen floor. And Nathan Brooks understood all at once that the woman crying in his tent was the poorest person he had ever met. He didn't say that. Instead, he said, you still can be, you know. What? Somebody's career. Somebody who's loved for nothing but being alive. He shrugged. You're 30 years old. That's not a life sentence. That's halftime. Plenty of game left. She laughed despite herself, and this time it was almost real. You're comparing my future to a football game. Best metaphor I've got. I'm a simple man. He glanced at his watch, and his tone shifted, went practical. It's almost 2. You need to get back before the early crew starts moving. Sun's up around 5:30, and the cabins stir before that. He stood. But before you go, I'm going to give you one piece of advice, and you can take it or leave it, and after tonight, you never have to talk to me again if it protects you. All right? She stood too, the blanket still around her shoulders. All right. Don't fight your father where he's strong. Nathan's eyes were steady. He's got money lawyers, a boardroom full of men who owe him. You go at him there, you'll lose every time. Men like that build fortresses and dare you to attack the walls. He tapped the side of his head. So you don't attack the walls. You find the crack. Everybody like that has a crack, something they did to get where they are that they've spent their whole life hoping nobody digs up, something they're afraid of. You don't beat a man like that with more money. You beat him with the truth. Because the truth's the one thing his money can't buy back once it's out. Victoria had gone very still. You sound like you've thought about this a great deal, she said slowly. Told you. Happened to somebody I loved once. Nathan reached past her and unzipped the tent flap, and the cold poured in. Somebody good. Somebody who wouldn't be bought and wouldn't be scared. And a man with money burned his whole life down over it, and got away clean and died a rich man in a big house. His voice was very level. So yeah, I've thought about it. I've thought about it my whole life. She looked up at him, and he could see the questions crowding behind her eyes, but she held them back. Who was it? She asked anyway gently. You don't have to tell me. But who? Nathan looked out at the dark mountain for a long moment. My father, he said finally. It was my father, Victoria. A good man named Daniel Brooks who built a business with his own two hands and lost every single thing he had to a bigger man who wanted what he'd built. It took the fight out of him. Took 10 years off his life. He died in a rented room, and I was 19 years old and holding his hand, and he made me promise I'd never let money turn me into a coward. Nathan's jaw flexed. So that's why I helped you up in that parking garage, and that's why I gave you my blanket tonight instead of throwing you out. Because my father raised me to help the person on the ground no matter who they are. Even, he added with the ghost of a smile, when they own the mountain. Victoria's eyes had filled again, but she was smiling through it, and something had changed in her face, a straightening of firmness like a spine, remembering it was made of steel. He'd be proud of you, she said. Your father. I think he'd be very proud. Maybe. Nathan cleared his throat, uncomfortable now with how much he'd said. Anyway, go. Keep to the tree line, stay off the gravel, it's loud. And Victoria, she paused at the flap. Whatever you decide about that man, that gala, all of it, you decide it. You, not him. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing. The day you stop letting him hold the pen is the day you get your life back. She stood there half in, half out of the tent, the wind pulling at her hair, the whole vast, dark mountain behind her. Can I ask you something? She said. Shoot. If I need to talk again, not like this, not sneaking, but if I need advice, from someone who wants nothing from me. She swallowed. Would you let me? Every ounce of self-preservation Nathan owned told him to say no. A maintenance man and a billionaire CEO trading secrets was a fuse burning towards something that could take his job, his reputation, his standing in a custody arrangement that hung by a thread. He should say no. Any smart man would say no. Yeah, he heard himself say. Yeah, all right, you can talk to me. Her whole face broke open with relief, and she nodded fast, and then she was gone into the dark. A shape moving low along the tree line, the way he'd told her, careful and quiet. Nathan Brooks stood at the flap of his tent and watched until he couldn't see her anymore. Then he zipped it shut, sat down on the cot, and looked at the photograph of his son taped to the pole. Well, buddy, he murmured, your old man just did something real dumb. He turned off the headlamp and lay back in the dark. But he didn't sleep. He lay there listening to the wind and thinking about a good man named Daniel Brooks and a study with a lock on the door and a 30-year-old woman who had everything money could buy and nothing money couldn't. And about the strange, dangerous, undeniable fact that for the first time in years, someone had come to Nathan Brooks not because he was useful, but because he was good. His father had died to keep that word. Nathan wasn't about to spend it cheap. Up the slope, a light came on in one of the cabins, a single window glowing gold against the black. Nathan watched it for a while. He didn't know whose it was. He didn't know that behind that glass, Victoria Hale had just picked up a legal pad and for the first time in her life begun to write down not what her father wanted, but what she wanted. He didn't know that a phone was ringing in a mansion 2 states away, and that Charles Hale, unable to sleep, was already sensing the way predators sense weather, that something in his daughter had shifted. Nathan didn't know any of that yet. All he knew was that the wind had died down and the mountain had gone quiet, and somewhere in the dark, a promise he'd made to a dying man 19 years ago had just come due, and he had without quite meaning to said yes. He closed his eyes. "Night, Dad," he whispered to no one. And far off, so faint, he might have imagined it, the last light in the cabins went out. The morning after the tent, Nathan told himself the whole thing was over. He'd said his piece, given his blanket back its dignity, and sent a crying woman off into the dark, and that was that. A man did a kind thing in the middle of the night, and then he went back to fixing water heaters, because water heaters didn't care who your father was. He carried that certainty around for exactly 9 days. On the 10th day, a company car came for him. He was under the sink in the 3rd-floor break room at Hale Dynamics headquarters, flat on his back, with a wrench in his teeth, when a pair of polished loafers appeared beside his boots, and a nervous voice said, "Mr. Brooks? Nathan Brooks?" Nathan slid out from under the cabinet. A young man in a suit that cost more than Nathan's truck was standing there holding a tablet like a shield. "That's me. Ms. Hale would like to see you, in her office." Nathan wiped his hands on the rag hanging from his belt and stood slow, feeling every joint. "There a leak up there?" The young man blinked. "I know, I don't think so." "Then why does she want me?" "I wasn't told, sir. I was just told to bring you." The young man swallowed. "Right away, actually." Nathan looked down at himself. The gray coveralls, the grease under his nails, the name patch that just said Brooks in red thread. He thought about all the eyes on the 43rd floor. He thought about the smart thing, which was to find a reason not to go. And then he thought about a legal pad he'd never seen and a promise he'd already made, and he set his wrench down in his toolbox. "Give me 2 minutes to wash up," he said. The elevator ride to 43 was the longest of his life. He watched the numbers climb and felt his stomach climb with them. When the doors opened, the whole floor went quiet. Not silent, but that particular hush of a dozen people pretending not to stare, while staring with everything they had. A maintenance man in coveralls walking across the marble toward the CEO's corner office was not a thing that happened. Nathan kept his eyes forward and his back straight, and walked like he had somewhere to be, because that was the only way he knew to walk into a room where he didn't belong. Her assistant, a severe woman named Ms. Okafor, looked him up and down over her glasses. "You're the maintenance contractor?" "Yes, ma'am." "She's expecting you." A pause, thin with disapproval. "For 11 minutes. She has the Kellerman call at 10:30. The office was all glass and light, and a view that made Nathan's ears want to pop. Victoria stood at the window with her back to the door, and when it clicked shut behind him, she turned, and for a second, she was just the woman from the tent again. She smiled, real and quick and grateful, before the CEO mask slid back down out of habit. "Mr. Brooks, thank you for coming." "Ms. Hale." He stayed near the door. "Your assistant tells me I've got 11 minutes and a phone call breathing down both our necks, so I'll be honest, what am I doing up here? Because down on the floor, a maintenance man getting summoned to the CEO's office is the kind of thing people talk about for a month." Her smile faltered. "I know. You're right. I didn't think." She pressed her fingers to her temple. "I've spent my whole life in rooms where I could just call for whoever I wanted, and I forgot that for you, it's not that simple. I'm sorry." "It's all right." His tone gentled. "Just tell me why I'm here." "Because I did what you said." She crossed to her desk and picked up something, the legal pad, its top pages covered in her tight-driven handwriting. "The night in the tent. You told me to stop letting him hold the pen. So I started writing down what I want. Not what he wants. What I want. And I've filled 11 pages, Mr. Brooks, and I got to the end of them last night and I realized I don't have anyone to show them to." She looked up and the mask was gone again. "Every advisor I have was hired by my father or wants my father's approval. Every friend I have is really a business contact. And the only person in the world I trust to read this and tell me the truth is a man I met for 2 hours in a tent." She held it out. "It's ridiculous. I know it's ridiculous. But will you read it?" Nathan didn't take it. "Not yet. Victoria." He said her name low so it wouldn't carry. "I'll read anything you want. But I need you to hear me first because I've been thinking about this for 9 days. He stepped closer. "You and me, a maintenance man, and the CEO, meeting in offices, meeting in tents. This is a fire, and we're both standing in the dry grass. It doesn't matter that nothing's happening. It matters what it looks like. And when it goes wrong, and these things always go wrong, it's not going to burn you. You'll be fine. You'll always be fine. You've got the whole building. It's going to burn me, my job, my name, and I've got a custody situation at home that a whisper could tip over." He held her eyes. "So before I read one word, I need you to understand what you're asking of me. You're asking me to risk everything I've got for a woman who's got everything, and I need to know you understand that." The color left her face. She set the pad down slowly. "I didn't," she admitted. "God, I didn't even. You're right. Again. I keep only seeing my own drowning, and I forget everyone around me can drown too." She sat down heavily in her chair. "You should go. This was selfish. My father says I'm exactly like him, and every time he says it, I want to scream, and then I do something like this, and I think maybe he's right. Hey!" Nathan came around the desk without thinking about the glass walls or the watching floor, and he crouched down beside her chair, so they were eye to eye. "Look at me. You are nothing like him. You know how I know, because a man like your father would never in 100 years worry that he'd hurt the maintenance guy. That thought would never once cross his mind. And it just crossed yours so hard it knocked you into that chair." He picked up the legal pad from the desk. "Give me the pages. I'll read them at home tonight where nobody's watching, and I'll bring you the truth on them. But we do this careful. My rules. Not in this office. Not in tents. There's a diner off Route 9, the Bluebell. Nobody from your world's ever set foot in it. If you need to talk, you come there alone, and you dress like a normal person for once in your life. Can you do normal?" A watery laugh escaped her. "I have no idea. I've never tried." "Well, halftime, remember, plenty of game left to learn." He straightened up and tucked the pad under his arm. "Now I've got about 4 minutes before Ms. Okafor comes in here with a spear, so I'm going to go fix the sink on the 3rd floor, and you're going to take your Kellerman call and be a CEO. And tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, Bluebell. Order the meatloaf. Trust me." Victoria stood, and something in her had steadied the way it had at the tent flap. "Thank you, Nathan." "Don't thank me yet." He was already moving toward the door. "You haven't tasted the meatloaf." The Bluebell Diner had been serving the same meatloaf since 1974, and Victoria Hale in jeans she'd bought that afternoon in a panic and a baseball cap that made her look like a college kid ate 2 full plates of it and cried a little into her mashed potatoes because she said it was the first meal in 6 years nobody had photographed. Nathan sat across from her in a cracked vinyl booth and told her the truth about her 11 pages. "Most of it's good," he said, tapping the legal pad. "You want to expand into clean water infrastructure instead of the defense contracts your father chases. You want to open the profit sharing to the hourly workers, not just the executives. You want to move headquarters somewhere cheaper and put the savings into the people. Victoria, this isn't a wish list. This is a business plan, and it's a smarter one than the man who locked you in a study ever wrote." She flushed with a pleasure so raw it was almost painful to watch. "You think so? I know so. I've spent my life around people who build things versus people who take things. Your father's a taker. This," he tapped the pad again, "this is a builder's plan. This is my father's kind of plan." He softened. "But here's the truth part you don't want to hear. You can't do a single line of it as long as he controls the board. Every one of these ideas dies the second you propose it because he'll vote it down to remind you who's in charge. You know that." The pleasure drained out of her. "I know. So the plan behind the plan has to come first." Nathan leaned in and lowered his voice, even though the only other customer was a trucker asleep over his coffee. You have to get control of that board. Legally, cleanly, permanently. Before you can build anything, you have to take the pen away from him for good. And I don't know how you do that, Victoria, because that's your world, and I fix toilets. But I know it has to be first." She was quiet a long moment, turning her water glass in a slow circle. "There might be a way," she said finally. "I've never let myself think about it seriously because thinking about it felt like treason. But there's a provision in the corporate charter. From the very beginning, when he set the company up, if the chairman is ever found to have committed fraud or serious misconduct in the founding or operation of the company, the board can remove him by simple majority, and his shares convert to non-voting." She looked up. "He wrote it himself, to protect the company from a bad chairman. He never once imagined the bad chairman would be him." Nathan felt the hair on his arms stand up. "And has he committed fraud in the founding of the company?" "I don't know." She said it slowly. "But Nathan, the way this company started. When I was a girl, there were things my mother wouldn't talk about. A partner in the early days who disappeared from every photograph, every story. A lawsuit that got settled and sealed. My father built Hale Dynamics from a garage. That's the legend. That's what the magazines say. But every time I got close to the real beginning, a door closed. He made doors close." She met his eyes. "You told me every man like him has a crack. Something he did to get where he is that he prays nobody digs up. I've spent my whole life not digging because I was afraid of what I'd find. But maybe it's time I found it. Where would it be? The founding records, the originals, not the sanitized versions. They'd be in the corporate archive, the physical vault in the sub-basement at headquarters. Decades of files nobody's touched. If there's anything, it's down there." She wrapped both hands around her coffee. "But that vault requires chairman-level authorization to open. I can't get in without him knowing. And the second he knows I want in, he'll know why." Nathan sat back in the booth and looked at this woman. And he understood that he was standing at the edge of something much bigger than a kind word in a parking garage, much bigger than a blanket in a tent. He could feel the ground tilting under him. He thought of Noah home with the sitter. He thought of his job. He thought of a promise to a dying man. He thought of a good man named Daniel Brooks who'd lost everything to a taker and made his sons swear never to be a coward. "Then we don't tell him you want in," Nathan said. "We find another way in." Victoria's eyebrows lifted. "Nathan, this is my fight. I can't ask you to." "Can't. You didn't ask." He drained his coffee. I offered because I've been listening to you for 2 dinners now, and everything you're describing, a man who builds a fortune and buries the bodies in a sealed vault. I've heard that story before, Victoria. My whole life I've heard it, and I never got to do a damn thing about it." His jaw set. "So maybe this time I do." They should have been more careful. For 3 weeks they weren't careful enough, and that was the thing that nearly ruined it all. Though later they'd both agree that some things you can't do carefully, or you don't do them at all. Victoria came to the Bluebell in her jeans and her baseball cap, and Nathan brought Noah once when the sitter fell through, and the boy and the billionaire built a tower out of coffee creamers, so tall the waitress had to intervene. And Victoria laughed so hard and so freely that a piece of the woman from the magazine covers cracked off and fell away forever. She started to look when she smiled like a person instead of a portrait. But the 43rd floor had eyes, and the eyes had noticed. They noticed that the CEO, who'd never once left the office before 8, now sometimes left at 6. They noticed she took no calls on certain nights. They noticed because someone whose whole job was noticing had been told to notice that a company car had once brought a maintenance contractor up to her office, and that the maintenance contractor's name was Nathan Brooks, and that Nathan Brooks had a son and an ex-wife and a fragile custody arrangement, and that all of this could be found out by a man with enough money to pay for the finding. The man's name was Gerald Voss. He was Charles Hale's fixer, and he had been fixing things for Charles Hale for 22 years, and he called the old man on a Tuesday night. "She's got a friend," Voss said. "The kind of friend a woman doesn't tell her father about." On the other end of the line, in a study, 2 states away, Charles Hale set down his brandy. Go on. Nathan didn't know about Voss. He didn't know about the phone call. He knew only that on a Thursday night, 3 days before the gala, Victoria came to the Bluebell, white as a sheet, slid into the booth and said, "He knows there's someone, my father. He didn't say your name, but he knows. He called tonight and he said, 'I hear my daughter's been keeping low company. I'd hate for low company to have an accident.'" Nathan went very still. "Those words," he said. "Have an accident." He said that. He says things like that. He never means them literally. It's how he controls people. He says the frightening thing and lets your imagination do the rest. But her hands were shaking around the coffee again, the way they'd shaken in the tent. "Nathan, I think you should stop. I think we should stop. I've dragged you into the path of a man who ruins people for sport, and I couldn't live with it if because of me you lost Noah, or your job, or—" "Victoria." Nathan reached across the table and took her shaking hands in both of his and held them still, and it was the first time he'd ever touched her that wasn't handing her a blanket or a cup of coffee, and they both felt it, and neither of them acknowledged it. "Look at me. Are you telling me to stop because you want to stop? Or because you're scared for me?" "Because I'm scared for you," she whispered. "God help me, I don't want to stop. For the first time in my life, I'm doing something that's mine with someone who sees me. I don't want to stop, but I'd rather lose that than watch him hurt you. Then listen to me, because my father taught me this, and I've never forgotten it." Nathan's voice was low and steady, and utterly without fear. "A bully's whole power is that you'll fold to protect the people you love. That's the lever. That's the only lever he's got. And the second you fold, he owns you forever, and he'll use the same lever again and again until there's nothing left of you." He tightened his grip on her hands. "My father folded. He folded to protect me and my mother. He gave up his fight to keep us safe. And you know what it got us. It got us nothing. The man ruined him anyway. Because that's what takers do. They take the fold, and then they take everything else. Folding doesn't save the people you love, Victoria. It just teaches the bully that fear works." He let her hands go. "So no, we don't stop. We get careful, much more careful starting right now because I've got Noah to think about. But we don't stop. We finish it. We find the crack in the vault, and we take the pen away from him for good, so he can never do this to you or anybody else again. That's the only way this ends. You don't outrun a taker. You take the truth away from him." Victoria looked at him for a long time. The trucker snored in the corner. The waitress refilled the coffee. Neither of them was drinking. "There's a gala Saturday," she said finally. "The Hale Foundation Charity Gala. It's where my father plans to introduce Preston as my fiancé in front of 600 people and the press. He's turned my engagement into a photo op for the company's image." Her chin came up, and Nathan watched the steel come back into her spine, watched it lock into place. "And here's the thing about the gala, Nathan. It's held at headquarters, in the grand atrium. And on gala nights for the caterers and the crews, the whole building's access system gets loosened. Doors that are locked every other night of the year are open, including—" She paused. "The service corridors that run past the sub-basement, past the archive vault." Nathan felt his pulse pick up. "You're saying—" "I'm saying the one night a year that vault is reachable without the chairman's authorization is a night when the whole building is unlocked for the help." She almost smiled. "And who moves through a building full of caterers and crews without a single person looking twice? Who's completely invisible at an event like that?" Nathan looked down at his coveralls, still bearing the red thread Brooks from that morning's shift. "A maintenance man," he said quietly. "A maintenance man." Victoria's eyes were shining now, not with tears, but with something fiercer. "My father spent 30 years building a fortress, and the crack in the wall is that he never once, not in his whole life, actually looked at the people who fix his fortress. To him, you're furniture. You're invisible. And on Saturday night, That's going to be the most dangerous thing in the building. And you, Nathan leaned in. Where are you while I'm invisible in the sub-basement? Because if he's introducing you as somebody's fiancé in front of 600 people, you can't exactly slip away. Her smile faded, and something harder took its place. I'll be exactly where he wants me, she said. Up on that stage. In the dress he picked, being introduced like a merger. She turned her coffee cup in its slow circle. He wants his photo op, Nathan. He wants to stand up in front of the whole world and show everyone that he still owns me. And you know what I'm going to let him get all the way to the top of that mountain. I'm going to let him think he's won. Because when a man like my father is standing at the very top, sure he's untouchable in front of every camera and every important person he knows. Her eyes came up to meet his. That's the moment he's got the farthest to fall. Nathan searched her face. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. She said it honestly. It depends what you find in that vault if you find anything. But I know I'm done being introduced. I know that whatever happens Saturday, I am not going to stand there silently and let him hand me to a stranger like a set of keys. Her voice dropped. I've stood there silently my whole life, Nathan. In the study when I was 9, at every dinner, every board meeting, every time he decided who I'd be. And the night I met you, you told me the day I stopped letting him hold the pen is the day I get my life back. She reached across the table, and this time she took his hand. Saturday I take the pen. I don't know how yet, but I take it. For a moment they just sat there, hands joined over the cracked formica, a maintenance man and a CEO, two people the world would never have put in the same room, bound together by a dead father and a living one, and a vault full of buried truth. Then Nathan said, All right, but we do it my way because I've run operations before, and you've run boardrooms, and these are not the same thing. He pulled a napkin over and dug a pen out of his coveralls. First rule, from this second on, we assume your father's watching everything. Your phone, your email, your car, everything. So we don't plan on any of it. We plan right here, right now, on this napkin, and then I burn the napkin. Understood? Understood. She watched him start to sketch. You really did do this professionally. 11 years. He didn't look up. Second rule. Saturday night you and I do not speak. Not once. Not a glance. If he's got a fixer, and a man like that always has a fixer, then that fixer's job Saturday is going to be watching you, and the fastest way to burn me is for your eyes to find me across that room. So you don't look for me. You forget I exist. You give the performance of your life up on that stage, and you trust that I'm downstairs doing my job. He met her eyes. Can you do that? Can you stand up there, getting handed off to a stranger, and not once look for the one friend you've got in the building? Her jaw tightened. Yes. You sure? Because it's going to be the loneliest hour of your life. Nathan. A sad smile touched her mouth. Every hour of my life has been the loneliest hour of my life. I've had 30 years of practice at standing somewhere terrible and not letting my face show it. She squeezed his hand once and let it go. I can give my father one more performance. It'll be the last one. I promise you that. They finished planning on the napkin. The service entrance Nathan would use. The uniform, which he already had. The timing keyed to the moment the speeches began, and every eye in the building, including the fixers, would be locked on the stage. Which corridor, which stairwell, which door. Victoria drew the sub-basement layout from memory, her hand sure and quick, and Nathan realized she'd been down there before as a child, exploring the parts of her father's kingdom she wasn't supposed to see. There's one thing I couldn't draw, she said when they were done. The vault itself. I've never been inside. It needs a code and I don't have it, and the code changes and only my father and the corporate secretary. She stopped. Her face changed. What? Nathan said. My mother? Victoria's voice had gone strange and soft. Before she died when I was 17, she wasn't herself at the end of the medication. She said a lot of things that didn't make sense, but there was one thing she said over and over, and I always thought it was just the sickness talking. She'd grab my hand and she'd say, The truth is where we were happy. Behind the day we were happy. And I never knew what it meant. Victoria's eyes were wide. But my parents' anniversary. The day they married. It's the one day my mother ever talked about being happy before the company before he changed. What if she wasn't confused? What if she was trying to give me the code to the vault? The truth is behind the day we were happy. Nathan felt the whole thing click together like a mechanism, like a bridge locking into load. Your mother knew, he said slowly. Whatever's down there. Your mother knew what her husband did, and she couldn't stop him, and she couldn't say it out loud, so she hid the key inside the one memory she trusted you to keep. She left you away in Victoria, 20 years ago. She left it right there in your hands and waited for you to be ready. Victoria pressed both hands to her mouth, and her eyes filled, and for a moment she couldn't speak at all. She used to say I'd need it someday, she finally whispered. You'll need this someday, my darling, and I won't be here. I thought it was the illness. I thought all this time I thought my mother died confused and afraid. A tear slid down. But she wasn't confused. She was fighting. She was fighting him the only way a woman like her could from her deathbed with a riddle, and she trusted me to solve it. Victoria wiped her face, and something enormous and unbreakable came into it. Saturday. I'll get you the exact date. And Nathan, if that code works, if it opens, then it means my mother's been waiting 20 years for me to finish what she started. And I am not going to let her down. Nathan reached across and took both her hands one last time. No, he said quietly. We're not. He picked up the napkin, folded it, and tucked it into his coveralls to burn it home. Then he laid a 20 on the table for the meatloaf that neither of them had really eaten. And they walked out into the parking lot separately, 3 minutes apart, the way they'd agreed. Careful, now, careful the way they should have been all along. That was Thursday. On Friday, the day before the gala, Charles Hale's fixer knocked on the door of a small apartment across town, and a tired woman answered, and Gerald Voss smiled and said, Ms. Brooks, Nathan Brooks's ex-wife, I represent some people who'd like to talk to you about your son, and about how much better his life could be. And he held up a check, and the woman looked at it, and the number on it was more than Nathan made in 3 years. Nathan didn't know about that yet either. He was home that Friday night, tucking Noah in, reading him the same dinosaur book for the 400th time, when the boy grabbed his hand the way he did when a big question was coming. Dad, is something happening? Nathan set the book down. What do you mean, Bud? You've been different. Kind of. Like when you're building something and you haven't figured out the tricky part yet. Noah looked up at him with those serious 8-year-old eyes. Are you building something? And Nathan Brooks, who had promised himself he'd never lie to his son, sat there on the edge of the little bed and thought about a woman on a stage, and a vault in a basement, and a dead mother's riddle, and a rich man's threat, and everything that was coming tomorrow, everything he'd risked, everything he could lose this boy, first of all. Yeah, he said quietly. Yeah, buddy. I'm building something. Is it hard? It's the hardest thing I've ever built. Noah considered this with great gravity. Is it for a good reason? Nathan brushed the hair back from his son's forehead. You remember what I told you about the trick when somebody's on the ground. The trick is who helps them up. That's right. Nathan's throat was tight. Somebody's on the ground, Noah. Somebody who's been on the ground her whole life, and nobody ever helped her up. And I've got a chance to help her up. And it's going to be hard, and it might get scary, but I made a promise to your grandpa a long time ago that I'd always help the person on the ground no matter who they are. He kissed the boy's forehead. So yeah, it's for a good reason. It's for the best reason there is. Noah nodded, slowly satisfied. Then he said, Grandpa would be proud of you. Nathan had to look away for a second out the dark window before he could trust his voice. Somebody told me that recently, he said. I sure hope she's right. He turned off the lamp and sat in the dark by his sleeping son for a long time. And somewhere across town, a check was changing hands and 2 states away. An old man in a study was laying out a gray suit for a gala, rehearsing a speech about family and legacy and the future of Hale Dynamics, certain, utterly arrogantly certain, that tomorrow night would go exactly the way he had planned every night of his daughter's life to go. He had no idea that the maintenance man he'd never bothered to look at was about to walk into his fortress. He had no idea that his dead wife had left a key in his living daughter's hands. And he had no idea, as he smoothed the lapels of his gray suit and admired himself in the mirror of a house built on a buried truth, that the ground he'd stood on so surely for 30 years had already quietly begun to crack. Saturday came the way a storm comes slow on the horizon, and then, all at once. Nathan spent the morning being a father because that was the anchor that kept the rest of him from spinning off into fear. He made Noah pancakes shaped like nothing in particular. He walked him 3 blocks to the sitters, a kind grandmother named Rosa, who'd been watching Noah since he was 4, and he crouched down on Rosa's porch and held his son's shoulders a beat longer than usual. "You be good for Rosa tonight," he said. "I might be late, real late, but I'll be here in the morning to make you the ugly pancakes. Deal?" "Deal." Noah studied his face with that unnerving 8-year-old radar. "You're doing the hard thing today, aren't you?" "Yeah, buddy. Today's the day." Noah threw his arms around Nathan's neck and squeezed, and Nathan closed his eyes and held on, and for one selfish second he thought about calling the whole thing off. Walking away, keeping his head down, keeping this boy, this small, warm, certain thing safe and close and his. Then he thought about Daniel Brooks dying in a rented room, and a woman who'd stood silent since she was 9, and a mother fighting from her deathbed with a riddle, and he let his son go. "Go on now," he said, his voice rough. "Rosa made cookies." He watched Noah disappear inside. Then he drove to headquarters, parked 3 blocks away as planned, and walked the rest with his coveralls in a duffel bag over his shoulder, one more invisible man in a city full of them. What Nathan didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that while he was flipping pancakes that morning, his phone had been ringing at the apartment he'd already left, and the voicemail light was blinking with a message from a lawyer he'd never hired. And across town, his ex-wife Sarah was sitting at her kitchen table, staring at a check with too many zeros and a business card that read, "Gerald Voss," and crying. Because she was not a cruel woman, she was just a tired one. And tired people are the easiest in the world for a rich man to buy. Voss had been very clear. All Sarah had to do was sign a document saying she had concerns about Nathan's stability, about his judgment, about a woman he'd been seen with, a powerful woman, and what kind of environment that made for a child. She didn't have to lie, Voss said smoothly. She only had to worry on paper and let the lawyers do the rest. And in exchange, their son would have everything. Private school. A real house. A future Nathan could never afford on a maintenance man's wages. "You'd be doing it for the boy," Voss had said, sliding the check an inch closer. "Any good mother would." Sarah hadn't signed. Not yet. But she hadn't torn it up either. And Charles Hale, when Voss reported this, had smiled his cold smile and said, "She'll sign. They always sign. Give her the weekend to hate herself, then send the courier Monday." None of this had reached Nathan. He walked into the loading dock of Hale Dynamics at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 hours before the gala, and became furniture. The building was already transforming. Caterers streamed through the service corridors with rolling carts. Florists argued over centerpieces. A sound crew tested microphones in the grand atrium, and their voices boomed and echoed off the marble 40 feet up. Nathan, in his coveralls, with a work order he'd generated himself that morning through the maintenance system, a legitimate ticket for a legitimate task, a flickering light in a sub-basement stairwell. The perfect cover moved through all of it, and not one person looked at him twice. He was right. He was furniture. He was the man who fixed the fortress, and to these people he simply did not exist. He found the stairwell on the work order and, yes, changed the flickering bulb, because a careful man makes his cover real. Then he stood in that stairwell and looked at the door at the bottom of it, the one Victoria had drawn on the napkin, the heavy steel door with the keypad that led to the corridor that led to the archive vault, and he checked his watch, and he settled in to wait. The plan was simple. When the speeches began upstairs, when every eye in the building, including the fixers, was locked on the stage where Victoria stood, that was when the sub-basement would empty and Nathan would move. 6 floors up in a suite the company kept for exactly this, Victoria Hale was being turned into a photograph. There were 3 of them working on her: a stylist, a makeup artist, a woman whose entire job was the dress, and they moved around her in a silent practice swarm, and Victoria stood in the center of it and let herself be assembled. The dress was midnight blue and cost more than the stylist made in a year, and her father had chosen it, of course, because her father chose everything. In the mirror, a beautiful woman was taking shape, poised and cold and perfect. The woman from the magazine covers, the woman the world knew. And behind that woman's eyes, invisible to everyone in the room, another woman was reciting a date. The truth is, behind the day we were happy. Her parents' anniversary, June the 9th, 1988. She'd confirmed it that morning casually from an old framed invitation in the company history display in the lobby. June 9th, 88, and she'd memorized it and folded it away in the private place where she kept the parts of herself her father couldn't reach. The door opened and her father walked in. "Leave us," Charles Hale said, and the swarm evaporated. He was 71 years old and still built like a man who'd carried things, still tall, still radiating that particular gravity that made rooms rearrange themselves around him. He looked at his daughter in the mirror, and he smiled, and it was almost tender. And that was the most frightening thing about him, that the cruelty and the tenderness came from the same place, and he couldn't tell them apart. "Look at you," he said. "You look like your mother." Victoria held very still. "Do I?" On our wedding day, the spitting image. He came and stood behind her, and she watched his reflection settle its hands on her shoulders, heavy and proprietary. "She'd be proud tonight. Everything I built, and now you at the head of it, married into the Aldridge fortune, 3 generations secured. This is what a family is, Victoria. This is legacy." "Is it?" Her voice was perfectly level. 30 years of practice. "Father, I never agreed to marry Preston Aldridge. I've never met him." "You'll meet him in an hour. He's charming." Charles's hands tightened, just slightly, just enough. "And you did agree, my dear. You agreed the day you took my name and my company and my money. Everything comes with a price. You've enjoyed the money your whole life. Tonight you pay a little of the price. That's not cruelty, that's arithmetic." In the mirror, Victoria looked at her father's face, and she thought about a maintenance man kneeling on a dirt floor, telling her, "You are not property." And she thought about a mother fighting from a deathbed with a riddle, and she felt the last piece of the thing she'd been building her whole life lock quietly into place. But her face showed none of it. She gave him the performance. She let her eyes drop, let her shoulders soften under his hands. Let him see the obedient daughter he'd manufactured in a locked study when she was 9. "Yes, father," she said quietly. And Charles Hale, who had spent 30 years reading people and bending them and had never once in his life been wrong about his own daughter, smiled and kissed the top of her head and said, "Good girl. Downstairs in 20 minutes. Don't be late. The whole world's watching tonight." He left. The door clicked shut, and Victoria Hale looked at herself in the mirror, at the beautiful cold photograph her father had made, and she said very softly to the woman behind the woman's eyes, "Yes, the whole world's watching. That's exactly the point." At 9 o'clock the gala began, and the grand atrium filled with 600 of the most powerful people on the eastern seaboard. Senators and CEOs, and old money and new, and the press penned into a roped area with their long lenses, and champagne moving through the crowd on silver trays. Charles Hale worked the room like the master he was, and Victoria moved a step behind him, where he'd placed her. Smiling the photograph's smile, shaking the hands he steered her toward, and at exactly the moment he intended. A young man appeared at her side, Preston Aldridge, handsome and hollow, who looked at Victoria the way a man looks at a car he's about to be handed the keys to. "Ms. Hale," he said, "I've heard so much." "Have you?" said Victoria, and smiled, and somewhere 6 floors below her, a maintenance man checked his watch in a dark stairwell. At 9:40, the lights in the atrium dimmed, and a spotlight found the stage, and Charles Hale climbed the 3 steps to the podium to the sound of 600 people applauding. And every eye in the building turned to him, including at a discreet distance near the back wall, the flat, watchful eyes of Gerald Voss, whose job tonight was to watch the daughter, and had therefore, as Nathan had predicted, stopped watching everything else. That was the moment. Down in the sub-basement, Nathan Brooks heard the applause come faintly through the concrete, felt the building's attention pull upward like a tide going out, and he moved. He crossed to the steel door, and he entered the code Victoria had given him from the napkin. The general service code good tonight, and tonight only, and the light went green and the lock clunked, and he was in. The corridor beyond was long and low and lined with pipe, and Nathan moved down it fast and quiet. A combat engineer again, boots silent on the concrete until he reached the vault. It was older than the rest of the building. A great gray door set into the wall, with a keypad worn shiny by a founder's fingers, and Nathan stood in front of it and pulled out his phone and typed a single word to Victoria in the only message they'd allowed themselves. And up on the stage, in the pocket of her midnight blue dress, Victoria felt her phone buzz once against her hip and did not react at all. Then Nathan keyed in the date. 6-9-8-8. The vault's ancient light flickered from red to green, and the bolt drew back with a deep mechanical thunk that Nathan felt in his teeth, and a dead woman's 20-year-old riddle swung open on its hinges. Up on the stage, Charles Hale spread his arms to the crowd. 32 years ago, he began, his voice rolling out over the silent room. I started this company with nothing but my own 2 hands and a belief in what a family could build together. And down in the vault, Nathan Brooks turned on his headlamp and started to read. The files were old, brittle, organized with the obsessive precision of a man who trusted no one to keep his secrets but himself. Nathan had been a soldier and a builder, not an accountant. But you didn't need to be an accountant to read what was in that vault. You needed only to be a man who'd spent his whole life on the other side of what rich men did to people. And Nathan had a lifetime's fluency in that. He found the founding documents. He found the original partnership agreement, because Hale Dynamics had not been built by one man with 2 hands. It had been built by 2 men, and the second man's name made Nathan's blood stop cold in his veins. Daniel Brooks. Nathan stood in the vault with his father's name in his hand, and the world tilted so hard he had to put a palm against the cold steel shelving to stay upright. He read it again, and again, and it did not change. The partnership agreement dated 32 years ago, establishing Hale Brooks Engineering, equal partners Charles Hale and Daniel Brooks. His father who had died in a rented room. His father who'd made him promise never to be a coward. His father who had never once in all the years Nathan knew him spoken the name Charles Hale, because Nathan understood now with a horror that rose in him like floodwater. Some wounds a man cannot say out loud. Some betrayals go so deep, the only way to survive them is silence. He made himself keep reading, because the partnership was only the beginning of the story, and the rest of it was worse. There was the fraud. Buried in the files, meticulous, undeniable forged signatures on a transfer of assets. Falsified board minutes for a meeting that never happened. A patent, the water filtration patent, that had been the young company's crown jewel. The invention that made Hale Dynamics filed in Charles Hale's name alone, though the engineering notes underneath it were unmistakably Daniel Brooks's work, Daniel Brooks's handwriting, Daniel Brooks's genius. Charles Hale had stolen his partner's invention, forged the documents to erase him from the company, and when Daniel Brooks fought back, Nathan found the sealed lawsuit. The one Victoria's mother wouldn't talk about. Charles had buried him under so much litigation, so many lawyers, so many bought and paid for delays, that a good man with no money had simply run out of the years and dollars it took to fight and settled for pennies and signed a sealed agreement that gagged him for life, and walked away with nothing but his broken name. It took the fight out of him, took 10 years off his life. He died in a rented room, and Nathan was 19 years old and holding his hand. Nathan stood in the vault of the fortune stolen from his father, and he wept. Silently, the way he'd learned to do everything in this building, his shoulders shaking, tears falling on his father's forged-away life. All these years he'd fixed the toilets and mopped the lobby and changed the light bulbs in the empire built on his father's ruin, and he never knew. He never knew the name on the building was the name of the man who'd killed his father. Slow. And Victoria. God. Victoria, whose paychecks he'd cashed, whose kindness he'd fallen for, whose fight he'd made his own Victoria, was that man's daughter. The thought hit him like a physical blow, and he had to sit down on the cold vault floor. Because here was the terrible arithmetic of it. The woman he'd knelt in front of the woman he'd given his blanket. The woman who'd built coffee creamer towers with his son. She carried the blood of the man who'd destroyed Daniel Brooks. And Nathan was down here helping her seize the very throne that had been bought with his father's life. 6 floors up, that man was speaking his father's eulogy without knowing it. And I want to speak tonight about the future. Charles Hale was saying to 600 rapt faces, because a company like a family is only as strong as the legacy it passes on. Which is why it gives me such profound joy to announce a union between 2 great families. Down in the vault, Nathan Brooks made a choice. He would remember for the rest of his life that it was a choice, and that he made it there on the cold floor, with his father's stolen name in his lap, and his own heart broken open. Because everything in him wanted revenge. Everything in him wanted to take these files upstairs and throw them in Charles Hale's face in front of 600 people, and the press, and burn the whole Hale empire to the ground, and salt the earth where it stood. He had the truth in his hands. He could destroy the man tonight completely, the way the man had destroyed his father. An eye for an eye. His father's ruin for Charles Hale's. It would have been justice. Some would even have called it mercy compared to what the old man deserved, and it would have destroyed Victoria too. Because you could not detonate the truth about Charles Hale without the shrapnel tearing through his daughter. Her name, her company, everything she'd worked to build, the profit sharing and the clean water plans and the future she'd finally started writing on a legal pad in the dark. Revenge was a bomb, and bombs did not care who stood next to the target. If Nathan walked upstairs and blew up Charles Hale out of vengeance, he would take down the one truly innocent person in the whole story right alongside the guilty one. His father's voice came to him then from a rented room 19 years gone. Don't let money turn you into a coward son, and don't let hate turn you into him. Nathan wiped his face. He gathered the documents, the partnership, the forgeries, the stolen patent, the sealed lawsuit into the waterproof folder he'd brought for exactly this, and he closed the vault, and he stood in the corridor for a long moment, breathing, putting the soldier back over the sun before he typed a second message to Victoria. Not the triumphant one he'd imagined. Something else. Found it. It's bad. It's not what you think. Meet me. Bluebell. After. Come alone. And Victoria, brace yourself. Up on the stage, Charles Hale reached the summit of his speech, and he turned and extended his hand toward his daughter, and the spotlight swung to find her, and 600 faces turned with it, and the cameras rose. My daughter, Victoria. Charles said, his voice thick with a triumph 30 years in the making. And her future husband, Preston Aldridge. Together they represent everything the Hale name has always stood for. The applause began. And Victoria Hale, standing in the spotlight, in the dress her father chose, felt her phone buzz twice against her hip, and knew that Nathan was out, and knew that whatever he'd found was bad, was worse than bad, was not what she thought, and she understood in that instant that she did not need to know what it was to know what she had to do. She'd spent 30 years waiting for permission. She was done waiting. She did not take Preston Aldridge's hand. The applause faltered as the crowd realized the beautiful woman in the spotlight was not moving toward the young man, was not smiling. The photograph's smile was instead reaching up calmly, deliberately, and taking the microphone from the podium out of her father's hand. Thank you all for coming, Victoria said, and her voice was steady, and it carried to every corner of that marble atrium. Before my father finishes, I have something to say. And I think after tonight, some of you are going to want to have heard me say it. Charles Hale's smile froze on his face. Victoria, he said low, off mic, the tender, cruel voice from the mirror. Give me the microphone, now. You're embarrassing yourself. No father." She didn't lower her voice at all. She let the whole room hear it. "I'm not embarrassing myself. For the first time in my life, I'm not embarrassing myself." She turned back to the 600 faces, to the cameras, to the senators and the CEOs and the old money and the press. "My name is Victoria Hale. I am the chief executive of this company, though most of you know that's mostly been a costume. Tonight, my father intended to announce my engagement to a man I have met exactly once 40 minutes ago as part of a financial arrangement between our families that I never agreed to and do not consent to." A ripple went through the crowd, a sharp collective intake. The cameras pushed closer. "I am not a merger. I am not an asset. I am not a set of keys to be handed to the Aldridge fortune to secure my father's expansion capital. And I am not going to stand on this stage in the dress he picked and let him sell me in front of 600 people while I smile." "Victoria." Charles's voice had gone from tender to iron. His hand closed around her arm. "Stop this. Now." She looked down at his hand on her arm. Then she looked up at him, and for the first time in her life, she was not afraid of her father. "Take your hand off me," she said quietly. "Or I'll tell them the rest of it right now instead of Monday. And believe me, Father, you would so much rather it wait until Monday." Something flickered in Charles Hale's eyes. It was fast, and it was almost invisible, and most of the 600 people watching would never have caught it. But Victoria caught it because she'd been reading her father's face since she was 9 years old, locked in a study. She caught it, and she understood it, and it turned her blood to ice and then to fire. It was fear. Her father, Charles Hale, who had never in her lifetime been afraid of anything, who bent rooms and bought people and buried truths, was looking at his daughter with the beginning of fear in his eyes. Because he did not know what she knew. He did not know how much. And a man with a buried body in the basement can never afford to find out how much someone knows. He took his hand off her arm. "There," Victoria said, and she smiled, and it was nothing like the photograph smile. It was something new and terrible and free. She lifted the microphone one more time. "I won't take up any more of your evening. I only wanted you all to hear from my own mouth that I decline. The engagement, the arrangement, the whole thing. I decline." She set the microphone gently back on the podium. "Enjoy the gala. The champagne's very good. My father spared no expense. He never does when the world is watching." And Victoria Hale walked off that stage, past her frozen father, past the hollow young man she'd refused, through 600 of the most powerful people on the eastern seaboard, every one of them silent, every camera tracking her, her heels striking the marble in a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. And she did not look back, and she did not look for Nathan, and she did not let a single thing show on her face until she was through the great glass doors and out into the night, where she finally stopped and put her hand against a cold stone pillar and shook. Behind her, the atrium erupted. 600 voices at once, the press surging against their ropes. And somewhere in that chaos near the back wall, Gerald Voss was already dialing his phone, already reporting to the man on the stage, already becoming the instrument of a rich man's wounded pride. And Charles Hale stood alone in the spotlight where his triumph should have been, in front of the whole world he'd summoned to witness his power, and felt the ground he'd stood on so surely for 30 years crack straight down the middle, and did not yet know that beneath the crack was a vault, and in the vault was his daughter's dead mother's riddle, and behind the riddle was a dead man named Daniel Brooks, and standing in the ruins of it all, holding the truth in a waterproof folder, was Daniel Brooks's son. The whole world had been watching. That had been the point. Charles Hale had just been humiliated in front of every important person he knew, and a humiliated predator does not lick his wounds. He hunts. And down in a sub-basement corridor, tucking a folder of stolen truth against his chest, Nathan Brooks knew, with the cold certainty of a man who'd studied predators his whole life, that whatever came next was going to make everything so far look like the easy part. She was already in the booth when Nathan got to the Bluebell, still in the midnight blue dress, a trench coat thrown over it, her hair coming loose, looking wildly out of place against the cracked vinyl and the buzzing neon. The trucker's corner was empty tonight. The waitress took one look at the two of them, poured 2 coffees without being asked, and went back behind the counter to give them room. Nathan slid in across from her and set the waterproof folder on the table between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "You did it," he said finally. "On the stage, you took the pen. I did it." Her hands were still trembling around the coffee, the way they'd trembled in the tent a lifetime ago. "Nathan, I have never. I could hear my own heart in my ears. I looked at all those people, and I looked at my father's hand on my arm, and I thought, if I don't do it now, right now, I never will. I'll stand here and let him marry me off, and I'll spend the rest of my life the way I spent the first 30 years of it." She laughed, shaky, disbelieving. "And then I just did it. I said no, out loud, to his face, in front of the whole world." Her eyes came up to his. "It's the bravest thing I've ever done, and I have you to thank for it. And I don't even know what I did it for yet, because you texted me, 'It's not what you think, and brace yourself.' And I've been sitting here for an hour trying to imagine what could possibly, Victoria." Nathan's voice stopped her. It was gentle, but there was something underneath it, something breaking, and she heard it, and went still. "Before I show you what's in this folder, I need to tell you something about myself. Something I didn't know until an hour ago. And it's going to change how you see me, and I need you to hear all of it before you decide anything. You're scaring me. I know, I'm sorry." He wrapped both hands around his coffee and didn't drink it. "You remember in the tent, the first night. You asked me who it was, the person a rich man burned down, the one I said happened to somebody I loved. And I told you it was my father. A good man named Daniel Brooks, who built a business with his own 2 hands and lost everything to a bigger man who wanted what he'd built. I remember." She was watching his face. "You said he died in a rented room, that you were 19 holding his hand." "That's right." Nathan's jaw worked. "What I didn't tell you, what I didn't know, Victoria, I swear to you before God, I didn't know was the name of the bigger man." He put his hand flat on the folder. "It's in here. The whole story's in here. The partnership, the theft, the lawsuit your mother wouldn't talk about." He made himself say it. The company wasn't built by one man with 2 hands. It was built by 2 men. Partners. Equal partners. Charles Hale and Daniel Brooks. My father, Victoria. Your father stole this company from my father. He forged the documents, he stole the patent that made him rich. He buried my father in lawsuits until there was nothing left of him, and then he erased his name from the whole story so completely that his own partner's son could spend 2 years fixing the toilets in his building and never know. Victoria did not move. She did not breathe. The color drained from her face so fast, Nathan half rose to catch her, but she put up a hand to stop him, and she sat there rigid, staring at the folder, and when she finally spoke, her voice was a thread. "No." "Victoria." "No." She shook her head slow, then faster. "No, that's the company was founded by my father alone. That's the story. There's a whole display in the lobby, the garage, the 2 hands, he's told it 10,000. He told it 10,000 times because he needed you to believe it," Nathan said as gently as he could. "That's what liars do with the truth they've buried. They pave over it. They pave over it so many times you forget there was ever a road underneath." He slid the folder across the table to her. "Read it. Don't take my word for anything. Read it yourself." She opened it with hands that shook so badly she could barely turn the pages. And Nathan watched a woman's whole world come apart in a diner booth. He watched her read the partnership agreement and go white. He watched her find the forged signatures and press her hand to her mouth. He watched her reach the engineering notes under the stolen patent, her father's crown jewel, the invention that made everything, and see another man's handwriting, another man's genius, and understand that the fortune she'd been born into, the fortune she'd spent her life inside, had been stolen off a dead man's workbench. He watched her reach the sealed lawsuit, the one her dying mother had refused to speak of, and understand at last what her mother had been trying to survive. And then she reached the last page, and she made a sound Nathan had never heard a person make before. And she looked up at him with her father's crime in her hands, and her whole face destroyed. "He killed your father," she whispered. "Slowly. On purpose. For money. And Nathan, I've been living off it my whole life. Every dress, every house, every dollar. It's your father's. It was stolen off your father's body, and I spent it. I spent 30 years of it. I didn't know, but I spent it. Hey, hey." Nathan was around the table now, sitting beside her, and she turned into him, and he held her while she came apart. And it was nothing like the composed woman on the stage. It was a person learning that everything she was had been built on a grave. "You didn't know. You were a child. You couldn't have known. That doesn't give it back to him." She pulled away enough to look at him. Her mascara ruined her voice, fierce through the tears. "Nathan, look at me. Look at what I'm sitting on. I own the company that was stolen from your family. Half of everything I have, more than half, is yours. It's rightfully yours. The Brooks half. And She grabbed his hand. "I'll give it back. All of it. The partnership was equal. That's what it says. That means half the company, half of everything. It's yours and Noah's. I'll sign it over. I'll call the lawyers Monday. No," Nathan said. She stopped. "What?" "No, Victoria. I don't want it." He said it quietly and completely, and she could hear that he meant it. "I've been sitting with this for an hour longer than you have down in that vault, and I want you to understand something, because it's the most important thing I'm ever going to say to you." He held her eyes. "When I opened that folder and saw my father's name, you want to know what I felt. I felt hate. Pure hate. 30 years of it all at once. I sat down on that vault floor, and I thought about walking up those stairs and throwing every one of those pages in Charles Hale's face in front of 600 people and the cameras and burning his whole world down the way he burned my father's. I could have done it. I had the truth in my hands. I could have destroyed him completely." "Why didn't you?" she whispered. "Because it would have destroyed you too." Nathan's voice cracked. "You were up on that stage, Victoria. You were about to do the bravest thing you'd ever done. And I sat on that floor, and I did the arithmetic, and there was no way to blow up your father without the shrapnel going straight through you. Your name, your company, everything you'd started to build, the profit sharing, and the clean water, and the future you finally started writing down. If I'd walked up those stairs for revenge, I'd have taken you out right alongside him. The one innocent person in the whole story." He shook his head. "And I heard my father's voice clear as I'm hearing myself now. He said, 'Don't let money turn you into a coward son. And don't let hate turn you into him.' And I understood finally what he meant. Charles Hale let money and greed turn him into a man who could destroy his own partner for a patent. If I let hate turn me into a man who'd destroy an innocent woman for revenge, then he wins. Then he made two monsters instead of one. And I'll be damned, Victoria, if I let that man make me into a version of himself 30 years after he's dead." Victoria was crying again, but it had changed the way it always changed with her, from grief into something that steadied her. "So what do we do?" she said. "Because I'm not keeping it. I won't. I can't sit on top of your father's stolen life and call myself an honest person. I won't be my father either." "Then we don't do it his way, and we don't do it out of hate," Nathan said. "We do it out of justice. There's a difference, and I need you to see it because it's the whole thing." He tapped the folder. "Revenge is you blowing up your father in public to make him hurt. Justice is you using this truth for exactly one purpose, to take the pen away from him for good, so he can never do to another human being what he did to mine. Not to destroy him, to stop him. To make sure the man who buries partners in basements never has the power to bury anyone again." He met her eyes. "You told me about the charter provision. Fraud or serious misconduct in the founding of the company, the board can remove the chairman by simple majority. His shares go non-voting. Well," he touched the folder. "There it is. That's the most documented founding fraud I've ever seen. This doesn't just embarrass him, Victoria. This legally permanently strips him of every ounce of control over that company. Tomorrow, you're not the CEO in a costume anymore. You're the CEO with the one weapon in the world your father can't buy, can't bury, and can't survive. Victoria stared at the folder, then at Nathan. You'd give me this, she said slowly. The proof of what he did to your family. You'd put it in my hands and let me use it and take nothing for yourself. I'd give it to the only person I trust to use it right, Nathan said. Yeah. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she wiped her face and sat up straight, and something came into her that Nathan recognized, the same thing that had walked off that stage past 600 people without looking back. I'll do it, she said. But not the way you think. Not just the board. Him. Her jaw set. I'm going to sit across from my father Nathan, just the two of us, and I'm going to put this on the table, and I'm going to give him a choice. The same kind of choice he's given people his whole life, except mine's going to be honest. Her voice hardened. Because he's not just coming for me now. You know that, don't you? A man like that doesn't lose in front of the whole world and go quietly to bed. He came here tonight to win, and I humiliated him, and right now, right this minute, he's already deciding how to make me pay. And he won't come at me. He's too smart for that. He'll come at what I care about. Her eyes lifted to Nathan's and filled with a new fear. He'll come at you. He'll come at Noah. And that was the moment Nathan's phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was Sarah, his ex-wife. Calling at 11:40 on a Saturday night, and Nathan's stomach dropped straight through the floor of the diner because Sarah did not call at 11:40 on a Saturday night. Sarah did not call at all if she could text, and a call at this hour meant only one thing. It's Noah's mother, he said and answered. Sarah, what's wrong? Is he okay? He listened. Victoria watched his face and saw it change, saw the color leave it, saw the jaw set, saw something in his eyes go flat and dangerous and very, very still. Slow down, Nathan said into the phone, his voice terribly calm. Slow down, Sarah. Say that again. A man came to your door. When? A pause. A check. How much? A longer pause, and Nathan closed his eyes. And a lawyer. Papers. Saying you have concerns about a woman. About Noah's environment. His hand had tightened on the phone until his knuckles were white. Sarah, listen to me. Listen. Did you sign it? The whole diner seemed to hold its breath. You didn't sign it, Nathan repeated, and let out a breath that shook. Okay, good. You did good, Sarah. No, I'm not angry. Thank you. Thank you for calling me. Thank you for not... He pressed his free hand over his eyes. The man's name. Did he give a name? A card? A pause. Voss. Gerald Voss. Across the table, Victoria made a small broken sound because she knew that name. She'd known that name her whole life. It was the name of the man who did the things her father didn't say out loud. Okay, Sarah, I need you to do something for me. I need you to keep that check and that card and every piece of paper he gave you. Don't throw any of it away. And I need you not to talk to that man again, and I need you not to sign one single thing no matter what number he puts in front of you. Can you do that for Noah? Can you do that? A pause, and something in Nathan's face cracked with a terrible tenderness. I know it's a lot of money. I know what it could mean for him. And I'm telling you, it's not what it looks like. The woman's not what he told you. And if you sign that paper, you're not helping Noah. You're helping the worst man I've ever heard of take a swing at his father. Trust me on this. Please. One more time, trust me. He nodded, eyes shut. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. I'll explain everything, I promise. Just keep him close tonight, and don't answer the door. I love that boy more than my life. You know I do. He hung up. He set the phone down on the table, very slowly, very carefully, the way you set down something you're afraid you'll throw, and he sat there with his hands flat on the formica, and his head bowed and his whole body rigid. "Nathan," Victoria said. "He went to my ex-wife." Nathan's voice was low and even, and it frightened her more than shouting would have. "While I was flipping pancakes this morning. While you were being dressed for that gala. Your father's man went to the mother of my child with a check for more than I make in 3 years and a stack of legal papers, and he tried to buy her into swearing, 'I'm an unfit father,' so they could take Noah." He lifted his head, and his eyes were wet and burning at the same time. "He's 8 years old, Victoria. He built a birdhouse. He knocked me over hugging me on the kitchen floor. And that man your father put a bounty on him, used my son as a lever, to get to me, to get to you. Nathan, I am so sorry Don't." He shook his head, not angry at her, just wrung out. "Don't apologize. You didn't do this. He did this. This is exactly the man in that folder, Victoria. This is Charles Hale 30 years ago. And tonight the same man, he finds the thing you love most, and he uses it to break you. He did it to my father. He tried to do it to you with a marriage, and now he's doing it to me with my son." His hand closed slowly into a fist on the table. "And Sarah didn't sign. She could have. God knows she could have used that money. She's tired, she's broke, she's raising him alone half the time. But she didn't sign. She called me instead. And you know why?" His voice broke. "Because 6 years ago, I sat her down and I told her, whatever happens between us, we don't ever use that boy as a weapon against each other. And she remembered. All these years later, with a fortune on the table, she remembered." Victoria reached across and took his fist in both her hands and held it until it uncurled. "That's the difference between you and my father," she said quietly. "Right there. That's the whole thing you've been trying to tell me since the tent. He uses the people he's supposed to love as weapons. You made a promise never to, and it held even in someone else's heart, even years later, even against all that money." Her eyes filled. "You didn't just refuse to become him, Nathan. You made the people around you refuse it too." Nathan looked at their joined hands on the table. Then he looked up at her, and the flatness was gone from his eyes, now replaced by something resolved and clear. "Then let's finish it," he said. "Tomorrow, however you want to do it. But it ends this weekend, Victoria, because I am not spending one more night with that man's shadow over my son's bed. You said you want to sit across from him and give him a choice. So do it, and I'll be there." "No," she said it fast. "No, Nathan, you can't be in the room. If he sees you with me, it confirms everything. I don't mean in the room." Nathan's mouth was a hard line. "I mean, I'll be there. In the building. Close. Because you are not going to sit across a table from Charles Hale alone, not after what he did tonight, not for anything. I've spent my whole life learning what men like him do to people who corner them. He's most dangerous exactly when he's losing. So you'll do the talking, and it'll be your fight and your choice and your truth. But I'll be close enough to hear you scream. That's the deal. Take it or leave it." She looked at him for a long moment, this maintenance man who'd knelt in a tent and given her his blanket, who'd found out tonight that her family had murdered his, and chosen mercy over revenge, in the same breath, who'd just learned a rich man had put a price on his child's head and whose first instinct was still to stand between her and the danger. "I'll take it," she whispered. "God help me, Nathan. I'll take it." The meeting was set for Sunday afternoon at the house. Victoria arranged it herself, from a payphone Nathan found for her. No cell phones. He'd said assume everything's watched, leaving a message with her father's assistant that she wanted to talk privately, just the two of them, to apologize and discuss the future. Charles Hale. When he got the message, allowed himself a thin smile because, of course, she wanted to apologize. They always came crawling back. The daughter he'd manufactured in a locked study could throw one tantrum on a stage, but she could no more escape him than a hand could escape its arm. He told his assistant to let her come. He did not tell his assistant that Gerald Voss was already 3 moves deep into a plan to make Nathan Brooks disappear from the custody of his son, because a man like Charles Hale liked to keep his instruments in separate drawers. Nathan drove her to within a block of the house and parked where he could see the gate. Victoria sat in the passenger seat of the maintenance man's old truck, in a plain gray dress she'd chosen herself, the waterproof folder in her lap, and she looked at the great iron gates of the house she'd grown up in, and she was for a moment 9 years old again. "I can still feel the lock," she said quietly, "on the study door. I can still hear it turn. 30 years, and I can still hear it." "You don't have to do this," Nathan said. "There are other ways. We can go straight to the board with the folder. You don't have to sit across from him." "Yes, I do." She turned to him. "That's exactly why I have to. Because as long as I can still hear that lock, he still owns a piece of me, and the only way to take it back is to walk in there and sit across from him and not be 9 years old anymore." She drew a breath. "My mother left me the way in Nathan. She fought him from her deathbed with a riddle because she couldn't fight him any other way. The least I can do is fight him to his face." She put her hand on the door handle, then stopped. "If I'm not out in 1 hour, then I'm coming through that gate, and I don't care who's watching," Nathan said. 1 hour. I'll be right here. Watch the clock." She nodded. She looked at him one more time, and there was so much in her face, gratitude and terror, and something neither of them had said out loud, and maybe never would. And then she squared her shoulders and got out of the truck and walked toward the gates of her father's house with a dead man's truth under her arm. Charles Hale received her in the study. He'd chosen the room on purpose, of course. He always chose the room on purpose. It was the same study, same heavy door, same lock, the room where a 9-year-old girl had learned what happened to daughters who corrected their fathers at dinner. He sat behind the enormous desk with the window light behind him, so she'd have to squint, another old trick, and he did not stand when she came in. "Victoria!" He gestured at the chair across the desk, the small hard chair, the supplicant's chair. "Sit. I'm glad you've come to your senses. Last night was an embarrassment, but it can be managed. I've already spoken to the press. We'll say it was stress exhaustion, a young woman overwhelmed by responsibility. Preston is willing to be patient. The engagement can still—" "There isn't going to be an engagement, Father." Victoria did not sit in the small hard chair. She remained standing, which she saw register in his eyes a small crease of displeasure at the broken script. "And I didn't come to my senses. I came because I know what you did." Charles Hale's face did not change. That was the thing about him. The thing that had made him what he was. His face simply did not change. "You'll have to be more specific, my dear. I've done a great many things. Every one of them for this family." "Daniel Brooks," Victoria said. And there it was. The thing she'd been watching for. The same flicker she'd caught on the stage faster than a blink, a hairline fracture across 30 years of stone, and then gone sealed over his face, a mask again. But she'd seen it. She'd been reading that face her whole life, and she'd seen it, and it told her everything. "I don't know the name," Charles said smoothly. "You do." Victoria set the folder on his desk. She did not open it. She just set it down squarely in the pool of light. "It's all in here. The partnership. Hale Brooks Engineering Equal Partners. The forged asset transfer. The falsified board minutes for a meeting that never happened. The water filtration patent you filed in your name alone, over engineering notes in Daniel Brooks's handwriting. His invention, his genius, the thing that built everything you have. And the lawsuit, Father. The one Mother wouldn't talk about all those years. The one where you buried a good man under so many lawyers he ran out of money and time and life and settled for pennies and signed a gag order and died in a rented room." Her voice was steady as stone. "You didn't build this company with your own 2 hands. You stole it off your partner's workbench, and then you erased him so completely that his own son grew up never knowing your name." Charles Hale looked at the folder for a long moment. Then he looked up at his daughter, and something moved behind his eyes, some recalculation, and when he spoke his voice had changed, dropped the smoothness, gone flat and cold and true, the voice underneath all the other voices. "His son," Charles said. "So that's who the maintenance man is?" "Yes, I see." Charles leaned back in his chair. "Daniel Brooks's boy. Well, that's almost poetic, isn't it?" He steepled his fingers. "You want to know what your problem is, Victoria? You think there's a difference between me and the rest of the world. You think what I did to Daniel Brooks was some special evil. It wasn't. It was business. He had something I needed to build this family's fortune, and he wouldn't sell, and so I took it because that is what strong men do and weak men cry about. Everything you have ever eaten, worn, learned, and inherited came from that one decision. You are a Hale because I was willing to do the thing Daniel Brooks wasn't. And now you come into my study wearing the education that money bought you, and you want to lecture me about a dead engineer. No, father. Victoria's voice did not rise. I don't want to lecture you. I want to give you a choice. Charles's eyebrows lifted faintly amused. A choice? The same kind you've given people your whole life. Except mine's honest, and mine's the last one you'll ever get from me. She put one finger on the folder. There's a provision in the charter you wrote. You wrote it yourself 30 years ago to protect the company from a corrupt chairman. Fraud or serious misconduct in the founding or operation of the company, and the board can remove the chairman by simple majority, and his shares convert to non-voting. You never imagined the corrupt chairman would be you. She leaned forward, both hands on his desk now, and looked her father in the eyes for the first time in her life without a single ounce of fear. So here's the choice. Option 1. Right now today you sign over your voting control of Hale Dynamics. You resign as chairman. You keep your money, your houses, your name, your reputation. You keep everything you stole. Father, because I am not my mother, and I am not going to spend my life fighting a ghost war over the past. But you never touch this company again. You never touch me again. And you call off Gerald Voss and every attack on Nathan Brooks and his son by sundown. And if one hair on that 8-year-old boy's head is disturbed, if one custody paper gets filed, if one more check gets waived at that mother, the deal is void. She straightened. That's option 1. Charles was very still now. And option 2, Victoria said, is that I take this folder to the full board Tuesday morning, and then to the SCEC, and then to every one of the 600 people who watched me walk off that stage last night and are dying to know why. And the truth destroys everything, Father. Not just your control of the company. Everything. Your name, your legacy, the whole 30-year monument you built to yourself. Daniel Brooks's son doesn't want a cent of it. He told me so he could have taken half of everything, and he wanted none of it because he's a better man than you'll ever understand. But I'll burn it. I'll burn all of it. I watched you try to buy a mother into selling her own child yesterday, and I promise you, Father, I will burn your entire life to the ground before I let you touch that little boy. She let it sit. So, option 1, you lose the company and keep the lie. Option 2, you lose everything. You have until sundown. And Father? She picked up the folder off his desk because she'd only ever brought a copy, and the originals were somewhere he'd never find them, and she'd wanted him to know she'd thought of that too. For the first time in your life, Victoria said, you don't get to hold the pen. And Charles Hale, 71 years old, sitting in the study where he'd locked his daughter as a child, in the house built on a dead man's stolen genius, looked up at the woman he'd manufactured to be obedient, and saw at last that he had failed that somewhere along the way. Despite the lock and the study, and the 30 years of arithmetic, she had become something he never intended and could not control, and could not for the first time in his long, ruthless life defeat. He opened his mouth. And for a moment, just a moment, nothing came out. Because Charles Hale had finally met a truth his money could not buy back. The silence in that study lasted a long time. Nathan, out in the truck, watched the clock climb toward the 40-minute mark and felt every muscle in his body wound tight enough to snap. He'd told her 1 hour. He was already in his mind walking through the gate, counting the steps to the door, when the great iron gate finally swung open and Victoria came out. She walked slow. She walked the way a person walks out of a building that used to be a prison when the doors have finally opened, and the legs don't quite believe it yet. And when she reached the truck and climbed in and shut the door, she didn't speak. She just sat there, the folder in her lap, staring straight ahead through the windshield. Victoria. Nathan's voice was careful. Talk to me. What happened? He signed. she said. Nathan went still. He signed. Not right away. Her voice was distant, strange, like she was describing something that had happened to someone else. He tried everything first. He tried charm. He tried threats. He tried telling me I was nothing without him, that I'd ruin the company, that the board would never follow me. He tried telling me my mother would be ashamed. A small broken laugh. That was his mistake, because I told him what mother actually did. I told him about the riddle, the code to the vault. The truth is behind the day we were happy. I told him his own dying wife spent her last strength making sure the truth outlived him and hid it in the one place he'd never think to look, inside our daughter. She turned to Nathan, and her eyes were wet, but her face was steady. And that's when it broke. Not the folder, not the board provision. Her. When he understood that the wife he thought he'd controlled had beaten him from the grave, that she'd been fighting him the whole time quietly, in a language only I could read, something went out of him. 30 years of certainty gone in a second. She looked back through the windshield. He signed everything. Resignation as chairman, voting control transferred, and a written order to Voss called him right there in front of me to stand down. Every attack on you, every custody paper, the check to Sarah, all of it, dead by sundown. Nathan let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 2 days. And Noah. Safe. It's over, Nathan. He can't touch him. He can't touch you. He's got no lever anymore, no board, no fixer aimed at you, nothing. I made him understand that the second Voss so much as drives down your street, the folder goes to the SEC and every camera in the country. She finally looked at him again. He kept his money, his houses, his name. I let him keep the lie just like I said I would, because you were right in the vault. This was never about revenge. It was about taking the pen. And I took it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The old truck ticked as the engine cooled. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked and a screen door slammed. Ordinary sounds, the sounds of a Sunday afternoon in a world that had just very quietly changed. There's one more thing, Victoria said, and it's the part I need you to hear before we drive away from here, because it can't wait and it can't be anything but the truth. She turned in the seat to face him fully. The company. What's left of it after today, it's clean now. It's mine, free and clear, and I'm going to build it into the thing I wrote on that legal pad. The clean water, the profit sharing, all of it. But Nathan, half of it, more than half, was stolen from your father. And I know you said you don't want it. I heard you. I believe you. But I can't build an honest company on a stolen foundation, and I won't. So I'm not offering you the money. I'm not offering you shares. She took a breath. I'm putting your father's name back on the building. Nathan turned to look at her. Hale Brooks, she said. Where it always should have been. Daniel Brooks gets his name back publicly, permanently, in the history and the lobby and the letterhead. And everyone learns he was the engineer who invented the thing that built it all. I'll set up a foundation in his name, Clean Water for Places That Don't Have It, which is the exact thing his patent was supposed to do before my father twisted it into defense contracts. Noah will run it someday if he wants to. Your father's genius will outlive both the men who fought over it. Her voice thickened. I can't give your father his life back, Nathan. I can't undo the rented room. But I can make sure the world knows his name, and I can make sure it stands for the thing he actually built. And that's not charity, and it's not guilt money. It's just the truth, finally standing up in the daylight where it belongs. Will you let me do that? For him? For Noah. Nathan Brooks looked out the windshield of his old truck for a long moment, and Victoria watched a lifetime of grief move across his face, the 19-year-old holding his father's hand, the man who'd mopped the lobby of the empire built on that grave, the son who'd promised a dying man he'd never let money make him a coward, or hate make him a monster. Yeah, he said finally, and his voice broke on the single word. Yeah, he'd like that. He'd like that a whole lot. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, unashamed. You know what he told me at the end? In that room, he said the thing that broke his heart wasn't losing the money. It was that his name got erased. That he'd built something real and beautiful, and it went out into the world wearing another man's name, and nobody would ever know it was his. Nathan's shoulders shook. And you're going to give it back to him. 30 years too late for him to see it, but you're going to give it back. I am. Victoria reached across the seat and took his hand. Because you gave me back to myself, Nathan. The least I can do is give a good man back his name. They sat in the truck and held hands and cried, the maintenance man and the billionaire, in front of the gates of a house that no longer had any power over either of them. And then Nathan started the engine and drove them away from it, and neither of them ever went back. The rest happened the way slow, honest things happen, not in a thunderclap, but over months, brick by patient brick. The board met that Tuesday, and with Victoria holding the founding documents and the charter provision, and her father's own signed resignation, there was no fight to speak of. Charles Hale's shares went non-voting. His name came off the door. Victoria Hale became for the first time the true and undisputed head of the company, no longer a costume, no longer a 9-year-old girl performing obedience, but a woman with the pen fully and finally in her own hand. She kept every promise she'd written on that legal pad. She moved the company out of defense contracts and into clean water infrastructure, the very thing Daniel Brooks's stolen patent had been designed to do before Charles twisted it. She opened profit sharing to every hourly worker in the building, the janitors, the caterers, the maintenance crews, the invisible people. Her father had never once looked at, and the first year those checks went out. Some of them large enough to change a life. There was not a person on the maintenance staff who didn't understand exactly why, and the name went back on the building. Hale Brooks in tall letters over the entrance where 600 people would pass beneath it every day, and a plaque in the lobby that told the true story. The two young engineers, the invention, the partnership with Daniel Brooks's photograph beside Charles Hale's, and beneath it, a line Victoria wrote herself, "The truth outlived the lie. It always does." Nathan came to see it once on a quiet Sunday when the building was empty. He stood in the lobby he used to mop and looked up at his father's face in the photograph, and he stood there a long, long time, and he didn't say anything, and he didn't need to. He'd brought Noah. And the boy read the plaque slowly, sounding out the harder words. And when he got to the end, he looked up at his father and said, "That's Grandpa, the one who died before I was born. That's him, Bud. He invented the water thing, the one that helps people who don't have clean water." He sure did. Noah looked back up at the photograph at the young man with his own stubborn chin and his own serious eyes, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "He looks like you, and kind of like me." Nathan put his hand on his son's shoulder and couldn't speak for a second. "Yeah," he finally managed. "Yeah, he does." As for Charles Hale, he lived out his years in the big house behind the iron gates with his money and his houses, and the lie he'd been allowed to keep, and he grew old the way men like that grow old alone, guarded, surrounded by things, and empty of people. Victoria did not visit. She'd told him the truth of it in the study that Sunday, the last real thing she ever said to him, that she forgave him not for his sake, but for her own, because carrying the hate would have made her into a smaller version of him, and she'd decided long ago in a diner booth that she'd rather be free than be right. She sent word when he took ill years later, and word when he passed, and she saw that he was buried decently, and she felt she told Nathan mostly a kind of distant sadness, not for the man he'd been, but for the man he could have been if he'd ever once in 70-odd years understood that the thing he spent his whole life chasing was the one thing his method guaranteed he'd never have. "He died surrounded by everything he stole," Victoria said quietly. And not one single person cried. And that's the whole lesson, isn't it, Nathan? That's the entire thing my father never learned. You can take everything a man builds. You can put your name on his work and his money in your account and his family under your thumb. But you cannot steal the thing that makes a life worth living because it was never for sale in the first place. It was almost exactly a year to the day since the first night in the tent when the company held its annual mountain retreat again. They came up the same road, to the same cabins, the same ridge with the wind coming down off it like it had somewhere to be. But everything was different now. The invisible people had names now, and profit sharing, and a CEO who knew them. And when the executives filed off toward the luxury cabins with their glass walls and their heated floors, one person turned the other way. Victoria Hale, the head of the company worth more than ever. Now that the company was clean and thriving and doing good in the world, carried a tent down the slope to a flat patch of ground beside a familiar patch of ground, and she began clumsily laughing at herself to pitch it. And Nathan Brooks, who was no longer on the maintenance crew because a year is a long time, and some things change, and other things become undeniable, came and knelt beside her and showed her again how to set the poles. "You're terrible at this," he said. "I'm learning," she said. "Halftime, remember, plenty of game left." Noah was there too, of course, 9 years old now, running around gathering firewood, with the fierce competence of a boy who'd been taught that useful work was nothing to be ashamed of. He'd built the fire mostly himself. Nathan just held the pieces. There were no secrets anymore. No sneaking, no midnight zippers, no whispered, "No one will see us." The whole company knew the story by now, some version of it. The true parts and the parts that had become legend. And the employees who'd once whispered about the maintenance man who embarrassed the Hales now looked at the two of them by their fire and understood that they were looking at the people who'd changed what the company was. There was no shame to hide from. There was nothing to hide at all. That was, Nathan thought, the whole difference between this year and last. A year ago, Victoria had crawled into his tent in the dark because it was the only place in the world she felt safe. Now she pitched her own tent beside his in the daylight in front of everyone, because she was safe everywhere, because she'd made herself safe, because she'd finally understood that safety was never something a fortune could buy you, or a father could grant you. It was something you built, brick by honest brick, out of who you decided to be. They sat around the fire as the stars came out over the ridge, the three of them, and for a while nobody said much. Noah roasted a marshmallow with the total concentration of a surgeon, burned it anyway, ate it happily. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said, watching the flames. "That first night, in the tent, you could have thrown me out. You should have, by every rule of self-preservation you had. Your job, your custody, everything it all said, throw the crazy crying woman out into the dark. Why didn't you—" Nathan poked at the fire with a stick, considering it. "My father," he said finally. "He raised me on one rule over everything else. He said, you help the person on the ground, no matter who they are, no matter what it costs you. Because there was a time I was on the ground, son, and the whole world walked past me, and it took the fight out of me. And I never want you to be one of the people who walks past." Nathan looked up, and the firelight moved on his face. "I didn't know that night that the man who put my father on the ground was your father. I didn't know I was helping up the daughter of the man who ruined my whole family. If I'd known—" He stopped. "You know what, I like to think it wouldn't have changed anything. I like to think I'd have given you the blanket anyway. Because that's the whole point of the rule. It only means something if you follow it, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." "It's the best rule I've ever heard," Victoria said softly. "It's the only one that matters." Nathan reached over and pulled his son back a few inches from the edge of the fire without even looking, the automatic vigilance of a father. Everything else people spend their lives chasing: money, power, control, winning. It's all just paying rent on a life. Your father had all of it, and he died with nothing that counted. My father had none of it, and he died having raised a son who'd help a stranger up in the dark." He shrugged. "I know which one I'd rather be. Took me a long time to be sure, but I'm sure now." Victoria looked at him across the fire. This man who'd knelt in a tent a year ago and told a stranger she wasn't property, who'd found his family's murder in a vault and chosen mercy, who'd faced down a rich man's threat to his child and never once considered folding, who'd handed her the weapon that could have made him rich and asked for nothing but his father's name back. "You know what I finally understand," she said. "The thing it took me 30 years in a tent on a mountain to learn. What's that? That real love can't be bought." Her voice was quiet and certain. "My father spent his whole life trying to buy things that only love can give. Loyalty, family, a legacy people would actually mourn. And he could never understand why the money never bought them, why the more he took the emptier he got. And I was going to be exactly like him, Nathan. I was on the same road. Manufactured to be obedient, taught that everything had a price, being sold at a gala to fund an expansion. I was one signature away from becoming my father in a dress. She looked at Noah, laughing at his second burned marshmallow, and then back at Nathan. And then a maintenance man gave me his blanket instead of throwing me out and told me I was somebody worth more than the money, and it broke the whole thing open. You didn't just save the company, Nathan. You didn't just save your son. You saved me from becoming the one thing I was most afraid of. You helped me up off the ground, and I'm never going to be able to repay that. So I've stopped trying, and I've decided to just spend the rest of my life proving your father's rule was right. The fire crackled. Noah yawned enormously and crawled over and put his head in his father's lap the way he did when the day was ending, and Nathan put his hand on the boy's hair, and above them, the stars came out thick and bright over the same ridge. Where a year ago, a frightened woman had come to a lonely man in the dark, and without either of them knowing it, saved each other's lives. He'd have liked you, Nathan said, looking down at his son, and then up at the stars. My dad. He'd have liked you a whole lot, Victoria. Not because of the company or the name going back on the building or any of it. Because you're a builder. Like him. You take what's broken and you make it into something good. He smiled, and it reached all the way to his eyes, the guarded thing finally fully gone. That's the highest thing he knew how to say about a person. She's a builder, and you are. They sat there a long time, the three of them, under the stars on the mountain, where the whole thing had begun. The place that had once witnessed a man's loneliness and a woman's fear had become without anyone deciding it. In so many words, the place where they'd found the one thing that neither wealth, nor power, nor 30 years of a cold man's arithmetic had ever been able to buy or steal or fake. They'd found a family, and no amount of money in the world had ever bought anything half as rich as 3 people around a fire, a burned marshmallow, a boy asleep in his father's lap, and a name Brooks finally permanently standing tall in the daylight, where the truth had been waiting all along to be told. Because power can control careers, and money can buy influence, and a cold man can steal a lifetime's work and put his own name on it and get away clean for 30 years. But none of it, not $1, not 1 ounce of power, not one buried lie, can ever replace integrity or compassion, or the simple, unbreakable courage of a man who kneels down in the dark and helps a stranger up off the ground. That is the one wealth that cannot be stolen. And in the end, it is the only wealth that was ever real.